And if you didn't hear from Matt, we do need to press the buttons tonight. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. Did you want me to repeat that or did you get it?
I got it. Nobody else did.
Okay. Just summing it up, we call the meeting to order. Now the microphone is on. Welcome, everybody. Do I hear a motion for adoption of the agenda?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? The ayes have it. Thank you, everyone. And we're moving on tonight. We just have one item and we're continuing on with our discussion, council deliberations and recommendations on the proposed 2023-2024 biennial budget. And the core focus of this tonight is to answer a series of questions that have been posed by council members over the last couple of weeks so that everybody has the benefit of the answers and the discussion. So thank you all for submitting those to staff. And with that, we could probably get started with Director Vaughn. Or I'm sorry, Director Perigo, please, Jeff. I'm gonna turn this. Just one moment while we get the presentation queued up here. Thanks, Matt.
Good evening, council members. Thanks for having us here. We are continuing our discussion regarding the budget and answering questions, as you mentioned, Deputy Mayor French, some of the questions that council members have posed to us over the last couple of weeks. It's going too fast here. Okay, I think we're all set now. So again, as we've received all additional questions and comments regarding the budget, we have identified a number of the questions that come up, kind of coalesce around 9 different categories. There's 5 that are in public works and 4 that are in finance. And on the screen there, you've got the 5 that are public works related on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, we've got the finance related questions. I will address the public works related questions, and Director Vaughn will step in to address the finance questions once we've gone through the public works ones. So the first category, or the first area, focus area that we're looking at is, are the funding levels adequate to sustain our funds that we, particularly in the sewer and surface water funds. Currently, we feel as though our operational levels are adequate. Again, we're not to the point where that we're necessarily we're surviving. We're not necessarily thriving, shall we say. We'll have a much better idea of where we stand going forward, especially with the capital perspective when we finish the master plans. That'll give us a good idea of where to go from there. So to understand our true operational and capital needs, we do need to administer our master plans, both for the surface water and sewer. Master plans will help identify the condition of our systems, propose short and long-term capital improvements, and ultimately provide guidance as to what levels of funding will be needed in future budgets. Furthermore, the long-term planning will help with personnel needs. Currently, we review and allocate our salaries each budget cycle based on the type of work and level of efforts that those projects will require. So that really addresses some of the issues that were brought up.
Councilmember Bodie?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Perigo. So the question on future budgets may adjust to master plan. So when it comes to sewer and surface water, if we have additional costs that are related to master plans, is that the kind of additional expenditure that would be addressed by user fees? Or is there some component of that that would be general fund related?
I think the intent would be to have the rates pay for itself.
Thank you. Just double checking. I assume that, but I wanted to see if that was your understanding as well.
Any other further questions regarding?
Colleagues, any other questions so far? Please continue.
All right, so the next focused area.
Sorry about that. Took me a moment. Are there any requests to increase those rates this cycle for sewer or surface water? There is for the sewer, correctly?
No, I believe for both, there's going to be proposed increases for the sewer as well as surface water.
Okay, so is that going to be a discussion later?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So the next area of focus was the overlay program. There were some questions regarding how that operated, who did the work, those sorts of things. So Lake Forest Park and other small cities use King County services for paving and other associated asset maintenance needs. We have used the contract since 1994, and that is a year-to-year contract that provided there's no termination for either partner, we can move forward from that and use their services. How the agreement works is that cities that work with King County provide their lists of streets for consideration. King County prepares the bid documents, bids the projects. They review the bids and completes the entire bidding process for each community. The cities then review the bid prices and prioritize the street selection to fit their budgets. In case the numbers do come high, they're available to opt out of certain streets that they may have provided from the initial proposed list of streets. King County then schedules the work with the cities and the contractor, and the county performs all of the on-site project management work. We do provide internally, we do have our operations folks on site when they are doing the paving, just for any incidentals that come up, and as well as addressing any special needs that we have for that. It's very much a turnkey process for us, and that's highly beneficial. Our labor costs to oversee the project and time to run put out the contract and review the bids and those sorts of things. It really saves us an immense amount of time when we're able to annihilate with another entity, whether it be the county or another city. So that's a huge benefit for us. So based on the level of effort that the county performs and the buying power that they have, each smaller jurisdiction does reap immense benefits, as I just mentioned.
Councilmember Bodie, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. It seems to me that partnership, sorry. It seems to me that partnership makes a lot of sense, and there's a lot of benefit to us. What I was hearkening back to is our priority list, because my recollection was we had a very old list of priorities, and that we were kind of adjusting those annually based on our more updated perceptions. Could you comment on how the annual priorities are selected? That was my recollection, is there was an old list and we kind of applied our current thinking to the old list, and that's how we came up with the annual list.
Would it be possible to delay that question just a little bit? Because that will be coming up shortly.
Yes, that's
Okay.
fine. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
So the primary driver for repaving our street list is the overall condition, though it's not the only one that decides or points us in the right direction as far as what streets should go next. Other factors include proximity to city facilities, schools, the volume of traffic, those sorts of things will help drive also which streets would rank higher than others. And
Could you perhaps explain a little about where does the council interact with the program in terms of, for example, do you request approval of which projects to do or approval of the contracts?
the council gets involved as far as allocating the funds to do the paving work itself. To my knowledge, they don't get involved with street by street.
So
Review.
how does the council as the responsibility to award contracts interact on this? Because there's a difference between establishing a budget and then actually approving the contract. Is the council not required to take action to approve the contracts?
I may have to defer to Administrator Hill.
Looks like I'm on. So in setting the budget, I mean, the council is the fiduciary of the city. You set the budget. The process that Director Perigo is going to describe is, and I don't want to get ahead of you, but we go through this process as pavement condition index. Did I get it right? To go through and identify those. And as he mentioned, we put a prioritized list, basically worst to best projects. You don't want to let a project or a street go over time. They cost a lot more to repair later on. But as he mentioned, and he'll go cover this, is to bring in other factors such as geography, traffic volume, et cetera, to put that list together. That would be presented to the council. But then based on that prioritized list and those factors, then the city through the Public Works Department just picks off that list each year with the available funds, and we slowly move through that list to the end.
I guess my question is related to the contracting authority, because isn't there a limit for which the city can enter a contract without council authority? Because the budget doesn't establish the authority to enter into a contract, it merely establishes the budget to proceed, to plan and develop the work.
You're correct in that with the Public Works project, anything over 50,000 contract comes to the city council. We could take a look at that process. Let us get with legal counsel and talk to them about that process and how that works with the county to see what that process might look like. Because I don't have an answer beyond that right now.
Okay, but the other question was, you present a list of priorities. So does the council merely observe the list, or does the council approve the list? The reason I'm asking is that I've observed in the last biennium that the roads paved may not have been the highest priority that had need in the city. And so I'm just questioning how, as the council, do we interact with that list to say, yeah, we think there's a priority here.
So I think as we go through, we have an old list, and obviously we've stated that during this next year, this is something that we'll tackle to get a new pavement condition index in, prioritize that and bring that forward to the council for your review. If there's discussion at that point in time as to why some projects ended up in a certain order compared to a thought that a council member may have, we can have that discussion at that time and set that priority. But we want to make sure that these are based on some measurable criteria of how we're setting our priorities to make sure that the graph that Director Perigo has up there doesn't come to fruition if we leave some off that should have been at the top because they were higher priority based on the factors set forth.
Councilmember Bodie.
Yes, I just want to observe that Director Perigo came in with an old list that we had, which may or may not have reflected the latest and most updated priorities. And so my understanding is on an interim basis, we kind of just looked at the list and our staff evaluated whether the priorities, fit. I kind of agree with Councilmember Lebo that it appeared to me that, for example, paving some of the areas that were paved didn't seem to be in the worst shape to me, but what do I know? I'm not an expert, right? But I appreciate what City Administrator Hill said, which is we're going to take a refreshed look at the list we have using objective criteria based on current conditions. So I appreciate that and look forward to the council hearing about the updates. So I think some of that addresses Councilmember Lebo's questions and concerns.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Goldman.
Yes, thank you. So my question, if you consider the rate at which we are repaving roads and the rate at which roads are deteriorating, are those in balance? Or are we gaining ground, losing ground?
That is something that the PCI value will tell us over time. I believe the last study was done in 2013, which is roughly 10 years ago, and they should be done every 4 to 5 years as best practice. So from that scenario, you can adjust and see how your pavement is reacting. Again, I've been here for about a year now, and my perception anyway for the roadways that they're holding up very, very well compared to other places where I've been before. And so the time for it to be placed and then have it replaced, I think is longer than many of the places I've been before. So it seems like they're holding up well now. As far as the cycle, that would be probably, I could probably do a presentation on that, pavement management 101, and go through the scenario of, how to look at things. This is what I did at a previous city with 8,000 lane miles of pavement and 425 bridges. So I can certainly put something together for the council.
Thank you.
Just what is your time frame for doing that update, and is it included in the current budget, or do we need to address that in some way?
My hope is that we'll be able to get it done sometime in early next year.
Within
Yes, yes.
I'm sorry, within the currently planned budget. Thank you.
Just summing it up, I think it's Councilmember Bodie said it very well. Excuse me, my voice is almost gone here. That the council, with your leadership, Director Perigo, are going to be looking to have a little bit more interaction about these priorities and going forward, helping us better understand how these, what the criterion are for deciding what different overlay programs are going to happen. So, Councilmember Furtani, excuse me.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, and I appreciate everybody's comments, especially Director Perigo's, about having this criteria for deciding how the resurfacing is going to go. Famously, where I grew up in LA, you could always tell where the council members' homes were because those were the streets that got resurfaced. And so whereas having a little discretion is nice, too much discretion may lead to a problem like that. So I really appreciate the fact that there are concrete objective criteria.
Wait a minute, what you're saying is the only council member's road that's been paved in the last decade. Oh, I won't go there. That's okay.
And just to reiterate that there's going to be a number of different pieces of the puzzle to decide what the criteria would be for selecting streets going forward. It's not just the PCI value, but that is an important driver of it. Again, location, geography, those sorts of things will be important for that also.
It's safe to say that none of us were involved in the 2013 plan.
Right. Please.
Thank you, Director Perigo. And I really appreciate you diving in and taking on this new look at how we do business here in our planning, in our public works area. And I just want to clarify, maybe not for the council, we may already know, but just for the sake of the public too, do our responsibilities for road surface maintenance include our state highways?
It does not.
Thank you, because in my personal experience, the worst roads I drive on right now are the state highways when it comes to the surface. So I just wanted everybody to understand that we don't have the ability to improve those.
All right. So again, I just wanted to, again, do a quick 101 with the PCI scoring, how that works and why that's important. You can see on the left-hand side of the screen, there's probably the 6 different types that are types of distresses on our pavement that we typically have with potholes, depressions, alligator cracking, which is pretty obvious to see. And those all, again, that all gets rolled into what the PCI value is based on the type of distress as well as the quantity of the distress on a certain section of roadway. And again, on the right-hand side, you can see a degradation curve for pavement. Every pavement has its own degradation curve. It looks similar to that, but not necessarily the same. Once you reach a certain point, then the slope gets so steep that it's really hard to get it back again. So it's important to maintain a PCI value of above 60 plus or minus, again, depending on the community, 60 to 65. After that, it really does fall off quite quickly and it gets very expensive. As you can see, for the maintenance side of things in the upper, in the middle where the green is, it's got a $1 sign there. That's roughly what it costs to, generally speaking, to, or at least percentage wise, if you will, $1 spent there is what it takes to maintain that versus $10 to reconstruct a street. Again, it's a 1 to 10 kind of ratio. So the value proposition here is trying to keep things at least in a good shape. 65 or higher will be kind of the benchmark for that. And again, there's different types of maintenance work that can be done, whether it be patching, seal coating, those sorts of things versus reconstructing or mill and overlay, those sorts of things. So there's a lot of tools in the toolbox we can use to maintain our streets in better condition. So basically, once we establish the PCI values, then we can prioritize things. And this is basically a master plan for going forward. It's no different than water and sewer or sewer and surface water. Identifying what you have for assets and then what the condition is, and then putting in basically an asset management plan together. So the third focus area was on the fixed capital asset improvement level. If we're what level of spending are we currently doing and how does that compare to what the general range is? And generally it's about 2 to 5%, depending on this. This is related to City Hall and Public Works facilities. So we're again, the range is typically say between 2 and 5%. We do have an aging City Hall. It's a little over 20 years now. As you can see, we've currently made some improvements interior wise. And coming in the future, we will have some major expenses with the roof membrane that needs to be replaced, air conditioning units, as well as the HVAC system. There's some great efficiencies that we can obtain by upgrading those systems. So again, our current funding level is around 3.2%, and future levels are expected to be probably in the 3 to 3.5 range, based on the additional bigger ticket items that we can expect over the next, say, 5 years or so.
Please.
Director Perigro, I'm sorry if you may have addressed this before. So to what extent do we have additional federal ARPA or other funds that we can apply to the aging City Hall? I know we have some future funds. Maybe we've earmarked them all already and I need my recollection refreshed, but I just wanted to, it seemed like we did have some benefit from that in terms of our aging infrastructure, but just going forward, as opposed to looking backward, do we have any of those opportunities?
I'm going to take that one for you. It's on page 11 of your budget. You'll find the chart that we originally proposed to council with the mayor's letter. And in the ARPA category, we took the majority of that as lost revenue. We set aside 300,000 that still has that federal mark on it so that we don't get in trouble of gifting of public funds. But you have $870,700 of lost revenue balance left. So that's what you have left remaining in ARPA funds after the recommendations in the mayor's proposed budget of how to spend a few of those dollars in the upcoming biennium.
Thank you. That sounds familiar now. Thank you for reminding me.
Relibo.
Thank you for that, Director, City Administrator Hill. So is the $300,000 for small business assistance, is that allocated or is that just a set aside that then has to be approved in the future?
1 second. Okay, that is an unallocated dollar amount that would be allocated by the future, by the council in the future when we brought forward contracts to reimburse small businesses for losses related to COVID.
Is that something the council has determined in terms of allocation of the money, or is that already been done? Can it be reallocated as an example, or is it already allocated for small business?
That 300,000, when we made the call with Treasury to mark that, to leave that 300,000, take the rest as lost revenue. Sorry, I can't talk tonight. I don't believe there's an opportunity for us to go back and now claim that $300,000 as lost revenue. So it will stay in that bucket.
Thank you.
And just to clarify that that was a discussion that the council had at the time. And so that's a well-known number for us.
Councilmember Golden.
Yes, also to clarify on that. So if we get to a point where no more small businesses come forward to request money, and what happens to that 300,000? Would it just go back to the federal government?
No, the city could use it at the end. I mean, so let me back up because I think I misspoke. We are a qualifying entity. We can use those dollars. We cannot give them to small business if we take them in as dollars. They have to remain federally marked. So I guess back to Councilmember Lebo's question. Yes, we could allocate those to the city. That's what we're doing prior to taking them as lost revenue. But we would then have to go back and look at the criteria under which dollars could be spent under CARES and ARPA. And they're very restrictive. And so there would be some things, and I think we would get into related to probably sewer and water. I think where stormwater were the big things where we could spend those and have them qualify because we're well past PPE and anything else to do to City Hall to combat COVID.
Thank you. Oh, Mr. Mayor.
Larry, just I think we have this money to spend till when is it? 20?
We have till 2024 to allocate, 2026 to spend.
And being somebody in small business and all the people I know in small business, it's still devastating businesses. So I think it's good to keep it there because the waves just kind of keep coming for some small businesses. And I think it's a good thing to have. And if they need it, we're here to help them, which, at the end, we got some time to do that. But right now I think it's a great idea to save it for them. So.
Any other thoughts before we move on? Thanks, everybody. Please.
So the fourth item, our fourth focus area that we have is regarding the CCTV camera that we proposed for our public works crew. That piece of equipment will help to supplement the stormwater and surface water, stormwater and sewer master plans that we're looking to do over the next couple of years or so. And what that will do is allow us to use our internal forces to go ahead and review the location of the pipes, the condition of the pipes, those sorts of things, to help create that master plan. So instead of having a consultant do all of the work, we could do some of the work in-house ourselves. It'll help us respond to illicit discharges that we have. A lot of times we don't have the ability to look in the pipes and see what's going on and where the spill is coming from. And this will help in that regard also. That's obviously something that the Ecology is very excited about, is having us track and trace our illicit discharges as quickly as we possibly can. That would allow us to do that in a much faster and more economical way to do that, instead of having a vendor come in. And speaking with our senior project manager, just on the surface water system, there's over 200 different locations that we don't have adequate information to know where the piping goes. that by itself would be a huge lift for us to bring a contractor in to spend some time trying to figure that out. So if we could do that on our own, that would be much better and more economical for us. The other good thing is that in speaking with King County Flood Control this week, they've identified 2 years of grant funding that would be available to us to offset some of the costs if needed. So that'd be a big plus to take some of the lift off of the general fund or the other funds that might be supporting this.
Thank you. Just a quick question though, at $93,000, it does take time to operate it. So when you look at the value of it, is this something that's going to have to be replaced every 5 years? And how does that compare to the cost of having vendors come in who have the equipment?
Well, again, that's something that we'd have to look at is the cost to have a vendor just come in for a short period of time. You're looking at probably about $1,500 to $2,000 per event. And just using some off the cuff numbers, even if 100 of those locations in the surface water need to be reviewed, we could be looking at a substantial number that would outpace the value of the camera.
Well, presumably they would all come in at the same time. You wouldn't have them come in at each different day to review 200.
Understood.
Yeah, thank you.
Jeff, I'm not sure I understood that exchange. So if we have our own camera, we still have to have, did I hear this correctly, that we still have to have consultants come in to review the data that the camera picks up? No,
No, that
it's
reviewing,
all in-house.
we could do that in-house, correct?
So I still didn't understand what just this interchange right here. So it will be a savings ultimately to the city then to be able to to purchase the camera, use our own staff to operate it and review the film, the video. And so there would be a savings annually over what we're currently spending to have consultants do that work. Is that what I'm understanding?
That is the ultimate goal, is to have savings from that. Now, obviously right now, with a big push would be for the master plans that we're working on. So that would be the larger saving piece every year, is to have that available. Now, whether or not, again, every year it depends on how many illicit discharges we have and how much need we have for identifying those other assets that we've got there for storm and sewer. But even if we spend $10,000 a year with a vendor just to look at those things on as needed basis, we will pay for it within 10 years, if you will. And that doesn't even mean that takes away that doesn't even consider the master plans that'll be needed also. The value, we also get the value of using that for the master plans too. Yes.
Thank you.
And the final focus area for Public Works was the material bins covers. Couple of things that we need to consider when we're looking at the cover for those bins is our facility at Public Works. We do have very limited on-site space. For those of you that have been out there, you know some of the parameters. Operationally, where those bins are now is optimal for our operations to work, especially when it's snow and ice season. And the material bins are not a standard size or layout, as we'll see from the map. The areas identified in the red, those are the bins that we have. There's 3 on on one side, 4 on the other. They are not a square, they're not round, they're not any consistent size whatsoever. That's really been shoehorned into that one little space. And again, I've spoken with our operations superintendent and trying to find another location to make those bins a little bit more geometric, if you will. There's really no good place to do so without impacting operations significantly. So unfortunately, we're kind of dealt the hand that we have. And, again, there's not really conceivable way to have modular or off the shelf product fit our needs.
Thank you. You're speaking to somebody who spent a lot of childhood on a farm. So it seems to me that a barn-like structure is the right thing here. Is that kind of where you're going? At the kind of just a roof with open sides?
Exactly. That's exactly what we're looking at.
Okay. And you and I had a little conversation at the end of the meeting last time where I mentioned that a roof like that is an ideal location for solar. And I wonder whether this is something you're considering and whether you have worked this into any kind of budget projections.
I haven't worked it into the budget, but it's something I certainly would like to entertain the idea to see if that'd be something that we could make happen.
Okay, thank you. I'm personally in favor of that, and good luck.
Perhaps we could get pilot project funding of some sort. The first material storage roof solar project.
And that's all I have. Director Fund. Oh, sorry.
Hi, thanks for the presentation on the bin covers. And I'm wondering, what's the electricity going to be used for? Is it just fed back into the grid?
If we did get solar, is that? We could use it for our own facilities. We could charge the F-150 Lightning truck that we will be seeking later on this year. But we would use it for our own needs. Yeah.
Colleagues, other questions? Just one quick one from me, Jeff, relative to the camera. I'm assuming that one of our new project managers would be somebody that would be operating that, or is it somebody else who would be operating that on staff?
It would be one of the crew members.
One of the crew members, actually.
Yep.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. I've seen the cameras in action around the community in the past, and there's been after storm events and blockages and things like that. So, okay, thank you for the clarification. Colleagues, other thoughts or questions for Mr. Perigo? Okay, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate your time. It's helpful. Director Vaughn.
Quick transition, same presentation. So walking down to more of the financial side of some of the budget questions, the revenue that's being proposed within the revenue dollar amount that is within the mayor's proposed budget starts with the property tax levy and the value of the 1%, which will be coming forward at this next meeting, is the $33,826. And then the sewer rate that for 2023 and 2024, and we are just, the 3% is only the city's portion of the sewer rate. So that being said, it's that value of the 3% is the 31 in 2023 and 32 in 24. Then walking down to the surface water rates, for the next 2 years, the city is currently proposing to increase that by 10%. And we are showing the value of that of being just over 110,000 on the first year and 123 on almost 124 on the second year of 2024. That being stated, the last time that the city did raise the surface water rate or the surface water management fee was back in 2019. And during COVID, everything just kind of stopped. And so knowing that we had some constraints on that fund on the utility side and on the capital side, it was elected to leave it alone for the time being, knowing that in this next budget, we would be bringing forward a rate increase ask. I'm going to continue forward and then stop after this slide, just to make sure that questions, and we might need to go back and forth for these two, but I don't want to get too far ahead in case there's some questions around these two slides. So then the optional additional revenue increases that the council has that they are able to elect to complete. The TBD is the Transportation Benefit District. So, and VLF is the vehicle license fee. So this is the Transportation Benefit District, that fund that assists in, well, doesn't assist, it pays for our road overlay program. And so there's an option there to increase it by an additional $10 on the fee, which is the current in place is $40, so it would increase it to $50. And then there's the TBD sales tax portion, which would increase that 0.1%. And the value of that is about $150,000. Walking down to the sewer utility tax and the surface water tax. Actually, these are two taxes that do become expenses within the utility funds, and they become revenue into the general fund. So when it states new general fund revenue, that's what's being stated there. And it's based off of just the one line item of the fee that's coming into the city for the sewer and the surface water, 6%, and it goes to the general fund. And I'm actually going to stop there and ask if there's any questions on those two before walking forward.
Colleagues.
Back to the first slide, please.
I think so. Yes.
Can you remind us who pays this, the surface water rate? What is that, and who is assessed that rate?
So the surface water rate is it's any individual, it's done with the property. So it's associated with your property taxes, or on your property tax. It's administered, I should say, not associated with, administered through the property tax, but it's every single within the city of Lake Forest Park, the city limits, on your parcel, that everybody that owns a home or owns property pays a fee, pays that surface water management fee. And there are variations on that fee, which I might have to lean on Director Perigo to explain, due to the levels.
Councilmember Goldman.
Yes, thanks for this information. I have a small question and then a bigger question, but I can wait my turn again for the bigger question. So looking at that, I see 10% listed for the surface water rate for both 23 and 24. Does that mean you'll be raising it? You're proposing to raise it 10% for next year and then an additional 10% the year after?
That is correct. And it's to support additional, the reasons are that we're supporting additional operation and maintenance needs. And that goes back to the NPDES. We have to lean on each other. It takes a team. That goes back to all of those permit requirements from the Clean Air Act, that we need to stay in compliance with. Therefore, our senior project manager has been in front of you quite a bit this year, discussing a lot of those items. And in addition, that's how we also fund our capital. So it's not just the surface water operational fund, it's how we're funding our capital. And this city, we've been an absolute leader in replacing our culverts. The L60 that just got completed, we're currently in design for the L90 through a grant on that one, hoping to secure funding in order to actually do the construction of that project. But the capital side, it's come at a cost, I guess, is what I need to shorten it up and say that is that completing all of these capital projects in the surface water fund, capital fund, have come at a cost. And so therefore, which is a great way to spend your dollars, but it has depleted, it has reduced the fund balance. And so the intention here is two things: to continue and assist the operating side of the fund for additional permits and fees and mandates that have come down that will need to be paid for within the regular utility. And then on the other side, on the capital, and the increase of that 10% captures the intention to do both.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Comment and a question. One, to Director Vaughn's point, we are really basically, we've been falling behind relative to recouping our costs because of federal and state mandated pollution discharge requirements for surface water. And this is not, this theme is something that's recurring in many of the city meetings regional meetings that I've attended. The SCA, many of the smaller communities are very concerned about the fact that there are these additional requirements and it's going to be very expensive for them to keep up with them. So this is, while it seems like a significant increase, and it is, it's also a very important one and it's necessary so we don't fall behind. The other thing is, my question was to Director Perrigo. My recollection is that for commercial property, the way the surface water fee is calculated is much different, correct? The point is that the commercial properties are paying significantly more into the surface water fund. Administrator Hill, excuse me.
Sorry, thanks. And I can't get into the details, but you have your commercial rate, and then what there is an equivalent residential unit that is applied, and there's a lot of math that goes into it, and we can get you some more detail on it, but it has to do with impervious surface, and that's how that is calculated. So your commercial is kind of your base fee, and then you have that equivalent residential unit that goes to the homeowner. And I don't know the details, but you're right, that's the general structure of that.
Yeah, somebody turn off their mic. There we go. Now you may.
Okay, thank you, Administrator Hill. Am I right in recollecting also that the schools need to pay this surface water rate?
I don't think we're sure.
I don't have an answer on that, if I'm being honest. I would have to double check on that one and circle back with you.
Okay, thank you. I do believe that may be the case, and that the last time we increased this, there was some concern on the part of the school district. So I just thought we should be prepared for that.
Councilmember Riddle.
Thank you. And my apologies for arriving late. I was heads down sewing my daughter's costume and lost track of time. So the surface water rate, that applies to every parcel or every parcel that has an improvement?
It's in every parcel. It's not every parcel that has an improvement. It's every single parcel. It would increase by 10%. And actually, I will state that all of that is actually coming forward in the packet. So that will be outlined actually very clearly in the user fees, and in addition, in the proposed resolution that's coming forward for the surface water management. Didn't quite think to have that in my back pocket for this evening, but it's ready to go and it will be released to you quite shortly, like tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Vaughn. Colleagues, other questions? Mr. Lebo.
Thank you. Did I recall that on the sewer rate, the King County was increasing the sewer rate? And so how is that factored in? Do we need to do a revenue increase?
Yes. So King County, we stayed focused on what the city, the umbrella of the city on for this presentation right now. But yes, you are absolutely correct that King County is proposing to raise their rate 5.75% on their portion of the rate. And in addition to that, and that is being proposed, that will be a direct pass through. So when King County increases their rate in order to, because of their costs for treating for the sewer treatment, then we as a city have to just directly pass that through to all the residential and commercial ratepayers.
So when you say it's a direct pass through, does the council do anything?
Yes, they do have to increase the rate.
So we would need so built into your budget right now is a rate increase of 5.7% per
Yes.
year.
Yes.
So it would, so when we think about what is the city council's actions with regard to fees and tax increases, it's already built into your
Yes.
budget. We just don't know. We don't see it here.
Yes, I'm not presenting it here, but you will again see that exact breakout in your council packet that's coming up.
Okay, thank you.
I think Councilmember Bodie was next.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo your point, Deputy Mayor, that the sewer rate and the surface water rate are big topics of discussion among the Sound Cities PIC group, policy issues group. And the reason is that between Department of Ecology, new mandates for controlling nutrients, and King County kind of sewer plans to address some of those, as well as on other ongoing issues. But a lot of it involves assuming that people are still going to put a lot of nitrogen on their properties, and then that will end up in the treatment system or the stormwater system, and we have to figure out how to deal with that. That's at least one piece of it as well as other larger issues. But these are major topics of conversation because some of the projected future increases from the Department of Ecology mandates and from King County sewer plans are stunningly large. So we'll have to see what happens there. It seems to me that there have to be some other approaches looked at, like best management practices and so forth, rather than just simply improving the infrastructure. But just a flag that these are really, they're hidden from the general public because they're not, right on the top of the mind for people, but they're big topics for local government.
Just quickly on point, Councilmember Bodie is absolutely correct. The King County was proposing, I believe it was over a 21% increase. And many members of the Sound Cities Association screamed and said that it's just absolutely untenable. And so the challenge is, because of these various changes in the regulations and the methodology that ecology is expecting people to utilize to adhere to these standards, there's still going to be some significant increases that have been pushed off unless they change, as Councilmember Bodie indicated, to some sort of different type of best management practice. And I think it's really important for the community to recognize that these are things that we can try to influence, and we have as cities, to keep the community from getting an egregiously high rate increase during a pandemic. But unless things change, we're going to see some significant increases that are outside of our control. You've been very patient, Vice Chair Cassover.
Oh, thank you very much. I think it would be helpful, Director Vaughan, if the council and the public could see some examples of an average bill and the kind of increase that we're likely to see in these sewer and surface water rates. I don't know how easy, well, particularly the sewer, I think, because that you can break out quite easily, but I understand surface water is part of what we pay as property tax, is within our property tax bills.
It is, yes, that is correct. It is, the city has elected to have it administered in that manner. That doesn't necessarily, so that's how everybody within the city limits of the city of Lake Forest Park would pay for that. Yes.
Okay, so I think it would just be helpful if you could give us, just simple kind of.
It's all
view.
prepared. And
it
so
is.
we'll just bring that back on Monday
That's fine.
as
Thank you.
and it will be produced in your council packets, in addition for the individual rates and the increases, and showing the dollar amount of each increase, in addition, showing the 10%, showing the rate increase broken out specifically for the county portion. And so it'll probably make more sense. I didn't think we were going to get into that level of detail. And so that was a little bit of my mistake, I guess you would, but all the information is done, and
Okay.
it will very easily, we can bring it back. And
Well, we'll look
Go
forward to
for it.
that. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Goldman.
Something on a related note, I think something that would be helpful for me would be to see what our options are. And I kind of think of it as like a gold, silver, bronze level. And that, like, what increases would we need at the bronze level to meet state mandates and required maintenance? And then at the silver level, we would also get maintenance that's preferred but not absolutely required. And then gold would allow us to do some of these long-term projects that we've kind of kept putting off. And so that way, to have a few options for exactly how much we increase these various rates and fees.
Administrator Hill.
So Director Perigo and I talked about just that thing today, and that's really what the stormwater and sewer master plans will tell us. Right now, what we're doing is proposing amounts will keep us up, just keep us doing what we're doing today. But these master plans will tell us what it would take to do your bronze, your silver, or your gold improvements, and how we could accelerate those, but at what cost to the ratepayers?
So this is bronze for the moment. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think we're bronze-ish right now. Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that.
and I'm just gonna,
No, go ahead. I'm not gonna make you do this, but it'd be really cool to see how much is being paid because of the mandates that the federal government and the state government are putting on us and never offering any money to help us do the projects that they think are real easy. And we also got to remember bronze, silver, or gold in the next 2 years, they'll probably put more mandates on us that will knock them all the way back down. So I'm kind of sticking up for the city here. It's not us spending all your money. It's the state and federal governments that decide things that they don't really. And I think Filippo and Tom will understand this too. They never give us the money to do their great ideas, and that's really hard on the city. So, sorry.
Yes, Mayor, and on point. I mean, I think all of us in our regional meetings really beat the drum for funding these various programs and changes that have been made at the state and federal level. Just quickly, just reminding everyone, next week we do have a public hearing on setting these various rates. And so there's quite a bit of homework to be done before that, as well as then we will actually be setting the rates, I believe, in 2 weeks later. No, a little bit longer than that later. So there's additional time there to reflect upon what the public's input and other comments that come across our desks between now and then. Director.
I was just going to circle back and add the importance of the master plan, because for the sewer rate, we are basing it on a study that was completed back in 2004. And that's, so back to a big plug for these master plans. That's what we're leaning on at this point, and why we're asking to raise the rate. Previously, King County used to raise it every other year. So then we'd play a leapfrog where the city would raise their portion one year and then the county would raise it the next year. Since things have changed with the county, just recently, I believe it was last year, they had to start raising it every single year. And since that change, the city's taking a little bit of a different approach on this one by doing it on an annual basis versus a biennial basis. So there's a little bit of history, just to kind of bring some of the newer council members along on why things have changed and adapted to the new situations that we're in.
And on point, Director Vaughn, too, the study from 2004 was completed by sort of the interim body that took over the wastewater system from King County before it was transitioned to the city of Lake Forest Park. And so there is quite a bit of history there. And I think that there are we know that there's some pretty large gaps, no pun intended, relative to the system, because we've discovered over the years that there are actually sewer lines that are in other cities and that are feeding into our lines and things like that. So.
Are there any other questions before I continue on? Okay. So moving on to the next slide.
Mr. Lebo.
Back to the previous slide. So on these are optional. And so is that 6% optional? Does that reflect the King County 5.7%, or is that 6% on top of the 3%?
So the way that the 6% is calculated is off of the sewer rate that is receipted into the city. So it's a total of both the King County portion and the city's portion, which defines the total rate that the city charges for residential and commercial
I guess my
customers.
question is this 6% here as an optional additional revenue increase? It is on top of what would otherwise be in the previous slide.
Yes.
So it would be 16%.
It doesn't quite work like that. It's
Okay,
it's
so
the one line, it's one, that's why I tried to specifically say it's one line item that is charged the 6%, not the total revenue that comes in for the fund. So
Okay,
just,
but when you look at the total incremental increase, it has a value. And this gets back to council members, Cassover's, how much are the taxpayers going to pay for
Some
these
examples.
increases? Yeah.
If I could just maybe clarify here, and I think I understand what I think I understand, and I'd like Director Vaughan to see if I'm right, is that we have two increases going on with the sewer and surface water. One is the actual rate, but the other is the sales tax, which is applied to the rate. No?
so it's not a sales tax. They call
Utility
it, they
tax.
call it a utility tax, and it becomes an expense out of the rate paying fund. So it's 6% and it's calculated only on the one line item that is receipted in as the main user rate fee. So just that one line item. And I could probably bring back an example on Monday, which would simplify this, I think. And instead of talking around in maybe a little bit of circles, and I think just simply seeing the math might make more sense. And it is called a tax because it does become an expense out of that fund. but then it becomes revenue into the general fund. And I will state that this is probably one of the only cities that I know of that does not have this already implemented. And east of the mountains, the utility taxes are significantly high in order to balance their general funds. I'll just put that out as for some history. And I'll.
Okay, thank you. And I think a lot of times, Director Vaughan, when we are asking you questions, we are asking questions as in our kind of role as homeowners, if you see what I mean. But you are responding in your role as the city finance officer, and we're kind of missing each other a little bit. So I do think that the math and the illustrations will be very, very helpful. So I appreciate you bringing those forward.
Councilmember Bodie.
Director Vaughn, you indicated that you're aware other cities have higher utility tax rates like this. Can you give us some sense of what some of those higher rates that you've seen have been, just so we have a frame of reference?
I will just refer back to a previous city that I worked for. City of Duval had 10% on their sewer, surface water, and water.
Okay.
So those three funds, so that was 10%, and that they may have changed that, they may have increased it. But when I was there as their director, that was the rate that was. And east of the mountains, it's not unheard of to go well into like 20%.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That's helpful for me for perspective, because it makes sense to me, but having some, context for the 6% that helps us in case we get questions even from our citizenry is very helpful.
Councilmember Goldman.
And jumping off that, something I thought that was really helpful at our previous meeting was with the building fees. We had a comparison to some of our nearby cities to kind of, as just a sort of sanity check to make sure we're in the right ballpark. And if there was a way to kind of have a similar check around our neighboring cities, just to, are we in the right ballpark? I think that would be very helpful, both for us and for the public to see.
Unless the rumors fester into facts, just closing the loop here, I think it would be excellent for us to have sort of a real world scenario. And just a reminder that the county portion of the bill is the increase is only on the county portion of the bill. Then there's potential for us to add a 6% utility tax on the bill in aggregate. And so I don't remember offhand how much the county portion of the bill is. I think it's 40%. I forget.
The much larger portion of the rate. I don't know. I didn't calculate out the exact percentage, but the total rate in 2022 is $69.43, and almost $50 of it is the county's rate. So
I just wanted to speak to the revenue increases here, and I speak as someone who is really fiscally conservative, but who has looked at our city's finances now in my term as a council member. And I think both of these sets of all of these approaches make sense to me, because absent something that helps us deal with the 1% cap on the property taxes and the need to address inflationary and just operational change pressures on our general fund, we need to look for things that are reasonable and have a rational basis. So I think these also in the user fee realm have a rational basis. So I know we could get some flack, but to me, these are fairly modest proposals that ring true in terms of linking new revenue sources to practical implementation.
I wholeheartedly agree. Did you have a comment?
I did, and I thank you very much for bringing this up, Councilmember Bodie. I agree too, and I do want to. I'm digging back into my memory here from 2 years ago from our budget hearings. There is, I believe, some relief for our lowest income residents when it comes to some of these bills, and I just think it would be helpful for the council and the public if we could just remind ourselves of that. If you could bring that forward also when you make the fuller presentation on these options that are before us.
That is very true. The city does offer a discount for those who qualify.
Thank you.
So
Excellent point. Thank you. Colleagues, other questions for Director Vaughn on this topic? Mr. Lebo.
It's really just a comment. And that one of the things that we have to be careful about, I think, is that the perception that we're raising taxes in times of high inflation, and we have a reserve that is 3 times our sort of goal reserve. And so we would be getting questions about why are we raising taxes so high when we have such high reserves? And the answer we would say is, well, because we see that in the future, we won't have those reserves. The future, though, is not something that we can all predict. And that as a city, we can make choices about how we spend our money and how many staff we have and where we spend our money. So I can tell you, I worked for an organization that departments did not want to carry large reserves because others would find those reserves and use them for other purposes other than which the department had decided to use them for. Which is a way of saying our taxpayers may decide that we are not being prudent with our budgets when we have such high reserves to then increase taxes without a great justification for it. The sewer utility and surface water utility tax goes into the general fund. And yes, we do know that we have unfunded new increases in our proposed mayor's budget, and we also have a shortfall in our general fund. But one can also say, well, that's because we're being conservative in our projections for our revenue projections.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Bodie.
I would just add the context that one of the most controversial issues in our last budget cycle was the fact that we were proposing to cut into our reserves and not maintaining the higher levels, which were proven to be rational for our city based on actual budget shortfall experience that led to layoffs and reduction of city services and the desire to have more stability over time. Now, we did propose to dip into those depending on our revenue projections. And I, for one, raised the issue of as revenues increased, how do we proportionately replenish our revenues and not just, ignore them going forward. So I do think they're there to be used, right? But I also think that it was actually the most controversial issue, I would say last time around was reducing our reserves. So anyway, I just I think there are responses, and I completely agree with Councilmember Lebo that we could get this question, but I do think it's just a little ironic because we got it the other way around last time. So I think there are forces on both sides. I do think that we do need to be mindful. That's why the examples are important. And Councilmember Cassover's point about the programs that we have for people who are in financial hardship. I do think those are important, but to be able to display what the implications of these are in our inflationary times. I'm kind of reminded though of something that Planning Commissioner Fudge mentioned the other day, which is, so salaries are going up. And in Seattle, people are actually data-wise paying there are more people paying 30% or less of their income for housing now than pre-pandemic. So I just thought, sometimes we need to recognize that there are lots of dynamics going on. And so I support this approach going forward, but we do need to hear from our public and make sure that we maybe take a fresh look at our financial hardship programs and make sure they're workable for people. I have had that impression that they work well and people do take advantage of them, but perhaps when these increases go into effect, publicizing those opportunities would be wise. Thank you.
I remember that conversation very well, Councilmember Bodie, about dipping into reserves. And for my part, I remember saying in sort of a little bit of frustration, saying this is what reserves are for. We have a pandemic, folks. But at the same time, as a body, we put a proviso in that said that if additional revenues came in, we'd start replenishing those reserves. So that's something to definitely consider as well if we choose, however we choose the formula to go forward. Councilmember Casso.
Yes, thank you. And thank you very much again, Councilmember Bodie. Good points being made here. And I would just like to say that many of you know I read widely in economic news, and I'm not convinced that the end of inflation is at all foreseeable. I'm also concerned, as I also read a lot of science news, that the pandemic is not done with us yet. And I think that maintaining some reserves at this particular point in history is actually very important, because I think there are some very rough waters ahead, and we need to be prepared to navigate them. So I would be very cautious about reducing our reserves at this time.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Riddle.
Thank you. I think the thing that I'm challenged with is sort of this popcorn of various revenue increases and how it doesn't feel as transparent to me as it would be if we weren't limited by that 1% cap. And I think it's really frustrating that we are forced to have these kinds of conversations about the utility tax, water tax. It's just this, it feels like the community has a hard time understanding these types of needs that we're seeing for these different revenue increases, especially, seeing that the year over year, housing prices or valuations went up, 38% from 21 to 22, and yet we get a 1% revenue increase of $38,000. And there's such a disconnect in our community between how those things, like they see a flush of money, they think we flush of money, and then they ask, why are we doing all these extra pieces of revenue increase? And so just the conversation is just such a struggle to have, to be honest. I agree wholeheartedly about the reserves. I think this is an absolute moment in time where we should be protecting them, as there is a lot of potential volatility in our future. So I agree completely with Councilmember Cassover that this is the right time for us to protect those as best as we can. But I just really frustrated having to have these little conversations when we just don't have a good tool that we can have a nice transparent conversation with our community about increasing revenue to meet inflation and other needs, regulatory needs that are being forced upon us. So anyways, that's my little tiny soapbox. I don't see anything here that is truly challenging for us to move forward on if we decide to. I think it's really that transparency and that conversation with the community is going to be our hardest part.
Thank you, Councilmember Riddle. Councilmember Goldman.
I also agree we should be keeping up our reserves. And Councilmember Bodie mentioned salaries. You may have read a Seattle Times article today that the UW medicine nurses approved a contract. They're getting a 21% salary increase over 2 years. And so I'm thinking there's going to be another shoe to drop for the city, that because inflation has been so high, we're going to have increases in salaries and benefits, and that's one of the major expenses of the city. And so having the reserves available to make sure that our employees are paid appropriately And so I approve of this approach as well.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Lebo.
I think when we say our fund balance reserves needs to be about $1.5 million, and we're proposing at the end of this biennium under this existing structure to be at $5.5 million. These are real costs to our citizens. And that we are gonna, I'm very opposed to raising general fund taxes when we have such a large reserve, because it will negatively reflect on what we're doing for our citizens at a time when they're seeing a high inflation rate. I think they'll just think that we're out of touch, that we can afford these kinds of increases and not reflect on what our citizens are actually seeing, particularly when our reserves are so high.
Councilmember Bodie.
I would just add that some of those funds you're including as reserves are kind of earmarked for future expenditures. So in that sense, it's a little misleading, I think, to use that $5 million number. But, but I understand the perception. I just think that we have to, as council members, deal with the difficult issue that Councilmember Riddle talked about and look at that 6-year projection and be planning accordingly. And some of these things are I think looking at what the actual dollars are will be instructive for us, because I don't know that for the average household, and honestly, for the household of new homeowners whose average new sales price is $1.179 million, I think these are going to be modest. And that's why I want to emphasize, though, that for those folks who may be the minority in Lake Forest Park at this point, who do have financial hardship, there are opportunities to get some relief. So.
Thank you, Councilmember Bodie. I think that go ahead, Mr. Furtani, before
All right, thanks, Deputy Mayor. And yes, to your point, I think a lot of these numbers seem very large, like the 1% levy leading to $33,000. But when you consider there's 5,000, 6,000 households, that's what $5, $6 a household. And I think that what will be presented on Monday might basically make this point strongly, that even though the percentages kind of look horrible, the fact is we're riding a razor's edge here, and a few $100,000 change will make a big difference as to what will happen in 4 or 5 years. And that's one of the things we really have to pay attention to. I'm really worried about basically the reserve being so low, looking at the projections that we saw in 6-year projections. And one of the things I wanted to kind of emphasize was that you're right. I mean, the choices that we make now, Councilmember Lebo, are going to reflect on what that curve is going to look like. But I've walked over to Public Works, I've walked over to the police department, and a lot of them are running really lean. And the fact that we're going to be losing 3 officers and we're going to need to replace them and stuff like that starts to worry me, because I don't know that we'll be able to attract the talent that we need to keep the city the way that it's going. So I think having a large reserve isn't a terrible thing at this time. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. I agree with my colleagues about the question of reserves. I think it is very challenging to we're going into even more uncertain economic times, even though I thought it couldn't be any more uncertain than it was in the last 2 years. So to your point, Councilmember Cassover, I really believe that there's going to be some serious challenges, and I think we need to kind of make sure that we have plenty of cushion, so to speak, for the variety of different things, inflationary pressures, not only on goods and services, but salaries. We're having a difficult time attracting talent right now. We're losing people because they're getting poached by other cities. And to Councilmember Riddle's point, it is sort of death by 1,000 cuts, these small little, increases on a variety of different places and in a variety of different places. I think it'd be far more palatable to the community if they said, if they were told, hey, it's going to be $35, you know, it's just going into it eyes open, so to speak. But the reality is, unfortunately, we are in that situation because of the 1% cap, and we have been falling behind, and we continue to fall behind. And the falling behindness is going to get worse over the next 2 years. I can guarantee it. And if we do not at least pull some of these levers, we're going to have some very serious challenges. And then the community is going to be faced with a much more dire set of questions that we'll have to ask them. And I, for one, am feeling okay about where we are right now. But I think that this is a conversation that's really important for us to have. Councilmember Riddle, I see you, I think your hand's up there.
Thank you. And as far as the reserves go, I think I understand where Councilmember Lebo's coming from. It feels like we have an over large reserve, but we are seeing our expenditures exceed our sort of guaranteed revenue for the next few biennium. And that the things that have been keeping us from being underwater like that have been the one-time revenue bumps, which are unpredictable. And so for us to assume that we're going to have some sort of one-time revenue bump, which would offset the dipping into that reserve, I think is just a little, it's not a method that I would want to move forward with. I think knowing that we're dipping into not into the reserves itself, but we're dipping into our extra over the next couple of bienniums without those one-time revenues makes me want to do our best to protect that the reserve as much as possible, because those one-time revenues are not guaranteed. So I think that's where my feeling comes from, not looking at these increases and recognizing that they're necessary.
Thank you, Councilmember. It's 7:27, folks. I want to do a time check here because we're scheduled to go to 7:30. Director Vaughn, where are you in your?
Quick.
I know your
double
to-do
check.
list has gotten to 2 pages now, thanks to all of us, but
Actually, I only have 4, so we are halfway there. Are we ready to move on? Okay. And is everybody time check? Is everybody okay? I'm sorry. Okay. So moving on to the next item that came into question was cost allocation or the flow of money within the budget. So the way that the city has always handled it is there is a cost allocation policy that's in place that's based on FTE counts and transaction counts. Historically, we've always leaned on what those have been previously in budgets, the actuals, and budgeted using those actual numbers. And then at the end of each January, we go in and we actually true it up. So that's why at the end of every year, there's the open period where we're spending, or where we have 20 days to charge back to the fiscal year. Hopefully this is a reminder for most council members, but then after that has been completed, then at that time, that's when the cost allocation, because there is a transaction component to it, takes place. And that's why it's really hard to get the annual, our annual dashboard completed sometimes by the February budget and finance meeting. So just leaning on that, we have the budgeted amounts and then we true it up to actuals every single year. It is based on a cost allocation policy that the city has in place. And then on the internal service funds, that's a little bit different. Those 501 currently and 502, hopefully newly created, and I will take a minute to just state what those funds are. 501 is the Vehicle Equipment and Replacement Fund. So they're called our internal service funds. And then 502, that's the one we're newly requesting to create, which is the Information Technology Fund, which is currently within 501, but we're requesting to break it out for additional transparency so that vehicles and equipment is all in one fund, and IT is currently in a separate fund in order to show them separately, which is how most other cities do actually propose and structure their budgets. So in an effort to become more transparent, that was the 502. That being stated, everything within, so for Public Works, the reason why we have chosen to put it into an internal service fund is that multiple funds, the general fund for parks, facilities, then we have the street fund that stands alone, and then we've got the sewer fund, the surface water fund, and all of those funds pay a proportionate amount into the internal service funds in order to fund all of the expenses for the year or for the biennium. In addition to adding to the reserves for the life cycle of a replacement, I will just use the case backhoe that was just purchased this year. So we did just purchase a brand new piece of equipment, but in 15 years, that piece of equipment will need to be replaced. So these funds help. We put money in every single year in order to have the balance in those funds in order to buy them when their life cycle has been completed. And so there is allocations, and we just mirrored the exact allocation from 501 to 502 in order to create that structure and have those funds proportionately go in. In the internal service funds for like 501, say police, so police repairs on their vehicles, you'll actually see that within the general fund because it isn't multiple funds going in to pay for them. The general fund supports police, therefore police will pay to repair all their own vehicles because that's the fund. Public Works, there's more funds at play. And so it's a proportion and that needs to fund our internal service funds. And that's kind of a higher overview of how it's completed. Are there any questions on that?
Councilmember Bodie.
Yes, I just wanted to share some historical perspective again with my fellow new council members. So in the last budget cycle, we actually looked at these maintenance and replacement cycles. And we actually looked at individual pieces of equipment and said, okay, can we postpone this replacement? Can we postpone this maintenance? And on top of that, I would just notice that some of the vehicles we acquire are vehicles that other cities sell. They're used vehicles and that other cities are selling that we consider to be a bargain for our city to get a used vehicle that still has some useful life. So just a little bit of background on that we are very frugal in this whole life cycle maintenance approach. And we did kind of use that almost like a reserve with the pandemic budget because we were looking for savings everywhere we could.
And I will add one piece to that is on our previous budget, there was a very large delta there between the previous budget and this budget. And if you go back, we only funded the vehicle and reserve at 50% because all of the funds were struggling at that point. And the biggest fund that pays into all of this is the general fund. And it's simply, times were extremely tight. And so we knew going in that we only funded it at 50%. Therefore, the numbers in the delta that you're going to see from the previous budget to this budget, it's a significant difference on those. In addition to 502 and all of the IT technology, as we've moved in through the pandemic and moved into the basically the hybrid working environment, and we've moved towards having different things like virtual servers. I can't even believe that we're already to the point of needing to budget in this next, the 23-24 to replace them. It's already been 5 years since, we've implemented it. But these are the things that we improve it and then we need to maintain it. And so these are real costs. And so when we've made great improvements, I'll even put one more plug about going over to Yakima on the disaster recovery and the backup server that we have over there. And again, being very cautious on how we spend and use our money. We took an end of life server over there very knowingly and patched it together and created a great solution for the time. And it has worked and it has been very successful, but now we need to replace it. And we've been very transparent on that, but now we need to make sure that we have a brand new server over there that's working as it should, so that we, and those are just two quick examples.
One other one is the PD radio system. We used to joke that to join the team as an officer here, you needed to know how to solder and how to repair the handheld radios, because the PD was scavenging parts to keep them going because they're obsolete. So thank you for those examples, Director Vaughn. Please continue.
And so this finishes this slide. Unless there's any other questions, I'm going to
Councilmember Furtani.
So just to summarize then, thanks for your presentation, and wondering, so every fund that pays into these internal service funds, it's not a percentage off the top, or it's at least a different percentage from each fund?
It changes. It changes as the information changes.
Thanks.
And it's trued up every single biennium we go through. And the other factor is vehicles and equipment has significantly increased. And I think on the last budget, to this budget, I'll just use a police car, for example. It's just gone up significantly. And so that's part of this too. That's part of the cost increased, is that in order to purchase a new police vehicle at this point, I think we're at what? Almost 60,000? It's 475. Okay, we were at, so there you go, 75. I'm sorry, this is why you shouldn't do it off the top of your head.
Don't do math on TV.
Don't do math on TV, clearly. But it's, oh, I didn't hear you at all. I'm like, I didn't think 75, but 67,500. I didn't think it was, I was like, really? Okay, I don't remember. If you can get one, that's going to be the other. Yes.
Any other questions on cost allocation? Okay, thank you.
So moving on to the final slide of the general fund, or moving on to the final slide of the funding principles. In the general fund, back to some of the points that have been brought up this evening, the salaries, the benefits are increasing. And the significant, the biggest bulk of that is coming from the general fund. So when salaries and benefits increase, and benefits, let me take one step back, and I'm using the word benefit in the sense of everything that goes into it being like health benefits, payroll taxes, anything, other entities call it like a fringe benefit, anything besides your actual salary, we're calling under the benefit umbrella. So when I say benefits, I don't just mean healthcare or those kind of your retirement, et cetera. I mean it kind of all inclusive. Before I continue. So that being said, the bulk of the salaries and benefits do come from the general fund. And there are some, like the building fees, that as we've had previous discussions, some departments are able to recoup their costs, such as the building department that we just had that discussion at the previous meeting, that our building official went through, stating that they are able to evaluate their fees and cover appropriate costs in order to cover their department's salaries and benefits. And the planning fees also, in addition, they're able to somewhat do the same thing, but they have a little bit, they have a couple rules. So they have certain fees that they can charge and recover certain costs. And then there's definitely a good portion of another piece of their work that they do that it doesn't really, that there isn't an application or a fee that an outside, that somebody would be paying. And then that being stated, that just is graciously stating the funds and the departments that really can support themselves. And the other departments, that's what all the other general fund revenues and rate paying fund revenues, what they pay for. Walking down, actually that walks me right down into the rate paying funds. So the rate paying funds, that's mostly Public Works is paid for out of those funds. And then a small portion of some other salaries are paid outside or within the rate paying fund. It's a lot less than you'd think. And that being stated, every single biennium, we reevaluate this allocation to make sure it's true. That being stated, because we went through previously, and I'm just going to use the Public Works Department as the department, when we recently went through and restructured that department, then that was a perfect time to evaluate how the cost allocation of salaries and benefits was being applied at that time and rework it. And therefore, from that conversation, we just continued it into using our best knowledge to date with the workload that we have, that we know about at hand. We do the best we can with allocating that as true as possible and reevaluate it on a very frequent basis to make sure that if we do need to pivot, that we are pivoting in the appropriate direction.
Councilmember Cassover.
Yeah, thank you very much, Director Vaughan. So just to clarify, the rate paying funds are sewer and surface water, right?
That is correct.
Right, okay, thank you.
Please. Councilmember Vaughn.
Director Vaughn, can you remind me just a rough estimate of what, when you use the broad definition of benefits, what percentage of that is that of the total of salaries and benefits? Do you have a number? I realize it might vary from department to department, but is there just kind of a ballpark, like 30% or something?
I think it's
like
higher
that?
than that. I think it's around 40, 35,
Really?
40.
That is high. Yeah, okay.
And that's just, again, a rough ballpark.
Yeah, okay, thank you. That is a little high in my experience.
Yeah, just want to note that I, as a retired state employee, I just received my health insurance rates for next year, and they have increased. Let me see. Boy, almost 20%.
Colleagues, questions for Director Vaughn on funding principles, general fund or rate paying funds? There's a lot of pieces of information to digest and think about between now and actually Monday. It's all budget all the time right now, right? So Director Vaughn, is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
This concludes the presentation. And then at this time, this concludes our portion of the presentation, I would say, if you.
Thank you very much. That's very, very helpful. Colleagues, any other topics you'd like to discuss here? I want to be sensitive to time since we've gone over, and I know people have plans, I'm sure, getting back to their families, et cetera. As I mentioned, we will have a committee of the whole meeting on Monday, as well as then there's the meeting. We have an additional meeting on Thursday, which is going to be, the public hearings will be part of the regular council meeting on Thursday. Do you have anything else for the good of the order, Mr. Furtado?
Point of order. Are we doing citizens' comments?
We are.
Okay.
Matt, do we have anybody that would like to make public comment at this time?
If you want to address the council, yep. Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Anderson, can you hear us?
Hold on.
I think you're muted. There you go.
I hadn't gotten the unmute button yet from Matt, but there it is. So,
Welcome.
yeah, thanks. First, I just want to say, and it's not news, but it's enjoyable in a way to observe this serious thought and sharp questions that all the council members contribute to these discussions. I think this council is working very well and asking important questions, and there won't always be unanimity on every answer. But one area that occurred to me, and I think Councilmember Cassover triggered this little sidebar on your inquiries, was the impact on residents in the city as you talk through this big menu, this popcorn, as Councilmember Riddle made it. What is the real impact on somebody? What's the real impact on me? And that's kind of one way a citizen would look at this. They'd, oh, that, well, then I have to put in some number for that and have a scribbled attempt to see the total impact of increases that might be applied to me. So it occurred to me that you ought to get, make up 5 citizens that represent different property owners, that represent different aspects of the city, different income levels, different asset levels, big houses, little houses, commuters or not commuters, or, you know, all the variations, and have 5 typical citizens who you would have fun naming, I'm sure. And then have a demonstration of how these things affect your model citizens. I think it would help citizens kind of get a hold of what all these things mean to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Jillian. In my world, we call those user personas, and we do come up with some creative names. So is there anyone else that would like to make public comment at this time?
Doesn't look like it, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Matt. All right. Well, if there's nothing else for the good of the order, we are adjourned. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Have a great evening.